Habitat loss and biodiversity. The species area curve describes the relationship between species richness, which is the number of species, and habitat loss. If we look closely at this curve, you will see that as habitat is removed from an intact landscape, there is initially a gradual decline in species richness. But notice that as more habitat is removed, there is a point at which the loss of species begins to accelerate rapidly. In a wonderfully elegant paper, Ondren reports that when the proportion of habitat remaining in the landscape drops below about 30 to 40%, then the mean size of habitat patches begins to decrease steeply, and the mean distance between these patches begins to increase steeply. This led Ondren to suggest that as habitat is removed from intact landscapes, then species loss is initially proportional with habitat loss. But as the landscape becomes increasingly cleared of habitat, then species loss is affected by habitat loss as well as rapidly declining patch size and rapidly increasing isolation of these patches. Small patches of habitat support fewer species for several reasons. For example, a greater proportion of the habitat in small patches is exposed to edge effects such as drying winds and introduced plants and animals. Increasing isolation between patches can inhibit movements of individuals between them, meaning, for example, that recolonisation after a perturbation such as fire may no longer be possible. This is why, as landscapes are progressively cleared of habitat, the loss of species accelerates. The loss of habitat therefore begins a cascade of changes detrimental to biodiversity and exacerbates impacts of other threats to biodiversity, such as introduced plants and animals. This is why habitat loss is the greatest threat to global biodiversity. Now, questions to consider. In which landscapes will protection or restoration of habitats result in greatest changes or increases to biodiversity? Intact landscapes or fragmented? What other threats to biodiversity are likely to be exacerbated by habitat loss and habitat fragmentation? Thanks for listening.
Created using Powtoon.